Author's note. As I've been explaining in the descriptions of these films, this story was composed as part of a year-long project to write 1,000 words a day. However, around the middle of February, I became sort of depressed and lost sight of the vision for this story. But I couldn't stop writing, so I just did mostly journal entries until the end of March, when the COVID lockdown really started getting serious. I was in Minneapolis at the time. I had been attending college, but it went all online and I found myself with a lot more free time, so I started writing fiction again. Anya, Lucy, God and God resumes here. It's the morning after Anya and God had sex. Anya's at school. God took the C train to Euclid Avenue and had an unhealthy breakfast. I introduced a new character, the feminine embodiment of God, and she was just spending a long time at a fictional place in Central Park called the Lamentation Pond. But now she's getting ready to leave. You see, the feminine embodiment of God has been at the Lamentation Pond for over a month, but it's only been an hour or so for her. And she's been thinking about lots of things: cranes, the rain, children's laughter, and she's been thinking about the masculine embodiment of God, and she wants to see him. So she goes and catches the subway into Brooklyn, and God's been walking around in a really foul mood, mostly because he hasn't pooped yet this morning, and he ate all that junk food. And God knows where to find God, because when she closes her eyes, she can hear the wind telling her about hills and regrets. And she follows the wind, and the wind becomes soft lights that hold her hand. And soon she comes upon God, who had walked down to the red train at Newlots Avenue and ridden until Borough Hall. Thus, God met God on the steps of Borough Hall, where there were skateboarders and bums out, even though it was cold. As they sat down together, God said,
"You know, Anya's going to be done with school soon."
"Yes, but I had to see you."
"Why?"
"Because Elof's been writing journal entries too long, and he needed to do some fiction." They laugh, but their laughter is restrained, and after a moment, they stop and look seriously at one another.
"I still don't understand why you wanted to separate in the first place."
Ugh, God, can we please not start with this? God covers her face with her hands.
"What do you mean, not start with this? How am I supposed to accept that we're just over? That's it. But you still want to be friends."
God, it wasn't working. Don't think it didn't hurt.
"I have a hard time believing that it hurt. Look at you. Are you wearing perfume? And what is that dress?"
God, for crying out loud, I'm here with you now, aren't I? It's not like
You find me when you're lonely and weak. Otherwise, you have lots of fun walking around Astor Place and listening to the flute player at the park.
How could you say something like that? You don't know anything about me. I'll bet for sure you don't know where I just came from.
Where? Taking a nap? Walking down by the Hudson River? Sipping tea at a cafe?
Ugh, no, you asshole. I was at the fucking Lamentation Pond.
Oh, wow, yeah, sure, I believe you. You do seem so calm and introspective.
You asshole. God gets up to leave, but God pulls her back down.
Now, don't be dramatic. Come on. What did you want to say?
It takes a few moments for God to regain her composure, but then she murmurs, "What's the first dream you can remember?"
What does this have to do with anything?
Just answer the question.
No, I want to know why it matters to you.
God takes a deep breath. Do you hear the cars going by down those streets? God nods. What about the sounds of those birds flying? Again, God nods. What about the rumbling of the subway below us? Can you feel it?
Yes, but where is this going?
But you can't hear the people taking pictures on the Brooklyn Bridge, can you? And you can't taste that guy's halal food. And you can't remember how it feels to kiss my lips. And you can't...
I remember your lips.
See, but you don't. You only think you do. If you kissed me, it'd be a surprise to you.
So you want me to kiss you? Is that what this is about?
No, I want you to tell me the first dream you can remember. God sighs.
Do you mean the earliest dream or the first one that comes to mind?
The earliest.
Are you going to tell me yours after I'm done?
Maybe, maybe not.
I was walking through a forest. There were dead leaves beneath my feet. There were tall trees everywhere. I couldn't hear anything because I was dreaming, but I could feel the leaves being crushed under the weight of my footsteps. I came upon a pond at which I knelt to drink. The water was cool and refreshing. I started to shiver and walked on. I came to a cliff and I looked out at the tender valley. The trees were losing their leaves, but they had not all gone yet. The colors of their leaves were faded, however. They were no longer vibrant. It was still but for the wind, which fasted and drew. I wondered, how did I get this high up? And then I woke up, but I was so young that I didn't really understand much about being awake and being asleep. I was alone in bed, and I remember wanting to be with my mom.
That's a fake dream. Tell me the real one.
But you already know about the real one. I've already told you. It's always the same one. I don't feel like repeating it.
Tell me again.
No, I don't want to. And listen, I really need to take a shit.
Tell me the dream. God catches God's arm and stares into his eyes.
Jeez, all right, sighs God. It's the one about the 2 stones. You already know it.
Go on.
Ugh. Basically, there are 2 stones, and I can't tell how big they are. They could be pebbles or boulders. There's no way of knowing. And they're being pushed together with terrible force, but they don't break. And I'm in the middle of them, only I'm just a speck of light right on the tangent where they're touching. And it should hurt, right? Being crushed by 2 huge stones? Huge relative to me, just a speck of light. But it doesn't hurt. Well, not exactly. I just feel numb. But it's a numbness that keeps increasing, and it's already way past my tolerance, so I try to wake up. But for a moment I can't, and that's the worst part of it, and that moment seems to last forever. Eventually, I do wake up, and one of my arms is numb, and I let the blood flow back into it, and then maybe I'll go pee and have some water, and then I'll go back to sleep. And the dream won't return that night, but it'll recur again sometime.
The clouds are moving across God slowly. They're large and completely cover the sky. God's bowels are really getting uncomfortable now. But God says, "You told me you used to have that dream a lot, but when was the last time you had it?"
I don't know. I haven't had it since I was a kid.
What do you think that means?
I don't know. What do you think it means?
I don't know. Why do you think you stopped having that dream?
I don't know. Maybe because I grew up and realized I didn't need to be so affected by my dreams.
But you still dream, don't you?
Yes, I still dream.
But you say you're not affected by your dreams.
No, why should I be?
He breaks away from God angrily and stands up.
Look, why are we even talking about this anyway? I desperately need to shit. Why don't you just come with me to a cafe or something, and I'll buy you a tea or something, and then I can use the restroom.
That's all right, God. You don't have enough money to buy me a tea. I'll just be going my way then.
I do too have money. What, so that's it? That's all you wanted from me?
Do you want me to want more from you?
I told you. I don't even know why you wanted to separate from me in the first place.
Yes, you do, jackass. God, too, is standing and starts to walk away from God.
Fuck! Well, am I going to see you again?
But God doesn't respond. It's a gray day in Brooklyn. God decides to walk across the Brooklyn Bridge, and God rushes down off the steps in the other direction, heading for the Barnes & Noble on Court Street, desperately needing to use the restroom. God is sitting on the toilet in the men's restroom of the Barnes & Noble on Court Street. This restroom is not very well cared for, but not owing entirely to the negligence of the staff, although this is admittedly a significant factor, but more to the savagery of the patrons, comprised mostly of bums and loafers in need of a public restroom like God, who leave soggy toilet paper on the dirty speckled white tiles and gum in the urinals and unflushed excrement in the toilets and tobacco and weed flakes on the metal toilet paper dispenser, who tag the hard plastic of the stalls with markers and etch symbols into the hand dryers or the mirrors. And while God is sitting here, his nose upturned slightly at the smell of stale waste hanging about the restroom and wafting up from between his thighs, he has this vision of a man and a woman sitting together eating dinner. So they're sitting at the table, and the table is mahogany, and there are placemats in front of them, and they're sitting across from one another, and the table is too large for just the two of them at which to be sitting, and they feel that the distance between themselves is far greater than just the 5 or so feet that it is. When they look up from their plates, they start to get the feeling of a train leaving the station, and they're both on the train looking at someone on the platform, and they're also on the platform themselves, waving to someone's receding head sticking out the window of the train, and it's a gray, lifeless day. On their plates is a dissevered human head, and the skin of the dissevered head is dark-colored, and the skin of the man and the woman is light-colored, and they both hold a wonkin' big knife in their dominant hand, which in both their cases is the right hand, and they both hold a fork without really any remarkable features, that is, a utilitarian fork, in their non-dominant hand, which in both their cases is the left hand. The man and the woman do want you to know that they can certainly afford silverware with elegant engravings and the like, but they choose not to flaunt their wealth as such, and thereby retain some semblance of modesty. The man is naked and the woman is naked but for high-heeled shoes and a purple polka-dotted bow in her blonde hair. Her fingernails are painted with polka dots, but God can't tell their color. The chairs in which the man and the woman sit are made of mahogany like the table. The room around them is empty and in fact does not exist. They and their table and chairs and the dark-skinned human head on each of their plates and the placemats are all that exists. There is also a glass of red wine before each of them.
"So, what do you think?" says the man, cutting off the ear of his dinner.
"I don't like it much," says the woman, munching on a bit of the nose of her dinner. "It hasn't been seasoned properly."
"Hasn't it?"
"No, not at all. They haven't given it enough salt."
"Let me try some of the eyeball," says the man, standing up a bit to reach his arm over to take the fork from the woman, who has cut out the eyeball and has speared some of it on her fork. The man sits back down and chews with a contemplative look on his face. "You're right, this is awful." He stands up and hands the woman her fork back. "Want some of mine?"
"No, that's all right," says the woman with a drawn, pensive expression.
"Honey, now I don't want you getting all upset. Here, I'll call Rupert. He'll whip you up a new one, don't you worry." "Oh no, hon, you don't have to do that. Nonsense. Rupert."
The man claps his hands twice, and a small boy in a valet's cap and freckles on his cheek and forehead comes running in, his arms held behind his back. "Yes, master?"
"The lady will be requiring a new meal. This one was not properly seasoned. See to it at once. That will be all."
"Yes, master."
The boy comes up and takes away the plate with the dark-skinned head, and he goes out into the kitchen, which is suspended like the table and chairs and placemats and plates and silverware and glasses of wine and the man and the woman, in a tapestry of extinguished stars. The boy places the plate and its head down onto the stainless steel counter and barks at one of the kitchen staff, a silhouette, in his attempt at an authoritative tone which falls flat due to his high-pitched voice.
"The madam didn't like this. Have another one made immediately, this time with better seasoning,"
before scurrying off to his little nowhere place. The silhouette sighs and takes the plate with the head on it and dumps the head into the big kitchen trash bin. The silhouette goes and tramps down the stairs into the place from which the heads are brought. There are a whole bunch of dark-skinned people all crowded in a room. There must be at least 100 of them, all crammed in this tiny room, and they're all chained up and they're all naked and they're all big and they're all men. They have another place where the women are kept. The men and the women used to be kept together, but then they had issues with sexual assaults and that sort of thing, and you know, that type of behavior can't be tolerated, so they split them up. And the silhouette sighs again and goes up to the door, and the door is special built so there's a slit where one of the men can be pulled through without opening the whole door and letting everybody out. It's the same door through which the men are fed. They call out feeding time, and then they shove in a bunch of this old rotten food, and they just keep shoving it in until they've put in as much as their calculations say the men need to eat every day. And the food goes and slips down the men's bodies, slick with sweat, and the men have to eat off each other's bodies or off the dirty ground. And the people who run this establishment don't care that the men in the front just eat up pretty much all the food and the men in the back get next to nothing. Every so often they'll pump in some tranquilizer and truck everyone out into a different cell, and then they'll haul out the men who have already died and they'll make some nice type of gumbo out of them. And the silhouette pulls out a man, and this one is particularly handsome, and the silhouette looks at him a little while longer than he normally would have, but then he shrugs and drags the man over to the slaughtering machine, and he sticks the man in there, and the men don't run or fight because they're so emaciated from the horrible food and living conditions, and the silhouette turns on the slaughtering machine, and the man's head falls into a metal bowl, and his body is wrapped up in plastic and sent up a conveyor belt into the fridge where the silhouettes will use it to make sausages and other nice foods. The silhouette carries the head up to the kitchen, and it and the other silhouettes get to work on the second entree. And in the meantime, the man and the woman have been sharing the man's dish, and they've nearly finished their glasses of wine, and they've been laughing tremendously and enjoying themselves, such that when the silhouettes have finished the woman's second head and it has been brought out into the dining area by the little valet boy, the man and the woman politely refuse, saying that they're absolutely stuffed, and the head is taken back to the kitchen and thrown away in the big kitchen trash bin. God is wiping his bottom clean with toilet paper. He examines the toilet paper each time he has finished wiping. When the toilet paper no longer bears any hints of being soiled, he flushes the toilet and leaves the stall. As he moves over to the sink and begins to wash his hands, God notices that he feels a lot better after having pooped. He washes his hands with a contented, weary grin and looks at himself in the mirror briefly after turning off the faucet and sees much more than I care to describe. He dries his hands, leaves the restroom, and walks out into the lurid, sickly air toward the R train. God is on the bridge, past the first tower. The afternoon sky is gray. Looking around at the tourists, she can feel it, that they are simply putting on a show, pretending to be amazed by this feat of engineering, the Brooklyn Bridge, while really they are trying to ignore the fact that they belong on their knees. Their cheeks are meant to be flooded with tears, but nothing comes out. Their eyes and faces are dry, and their laughter is unbecoming, and their families are not cohesive, and their futures don't exist. Some of them glance at God as she walks down the pathway, and they wonder why she doesn't have a face, or why she's so beautiful, or why she smells so nice, or why her eyes are aflame with death. And God walks across the bridge as quickly as she can. She's trying with all her might to find some shelter, but there is no shelter for her. She lives every day on the street. At night, she sleeps on the most filthy ground she can find. She hates men and uses them to make her ill because she needs to be ill. She is a shapeshifter and owns a penthouse in Midtown. She's lying on the floor in her bathroom, surrounded by vomit and an empty pill bottle. God looks in the mirror and screams, "I'm not God!" But her reflection laughs and says, "You're stuck with me forever, hon. Besides, ain't it what you wanted?" And God tries to break the mirror, but she only hurts herself. And God tries to hurt herself, but she only breaks the mirror. And God has to be God forever. God has to be God forever. Anyone who has to be anything forever will eventually get sick of it. So the question is, why did God create God to be God? The answer is that a river must run, the rain must pour, a child must howl, a man must eat, the moon must wax and wane. God had only one other option than to create God. God could have not created at all. But if God had done so, there would have been no God not to create God. Do you understand? God understands. And this is why, with great sorrow and shame, he goes up to the little police vehicle stationed at the other side of the bridge, takes out a gun from thin air, and shoots the cop who's sitting around looking the other way, playing some game or watching some movie on his smartphone. The cop crumbles over and God drops the gun. There's another cop stationed in another car just a little ways away. This cop comes out and sees his fallen colleague and sees God standing there, her arms held up in the air, the gun at her feet, and rushes over with his gun pointed at her. He forces her down onto the ground face first and handcuffs her. He takes her away in his little buggy, down to the cops with the real cars, and hands her over to them. They take her to the police station just a few blocks away. They make her stand still and they start asking her questions, appraising her hungrily. The first thing they ask is who she is. They couldn't find an ID among her belongings. She says, "Why do you need to know who I am?" They say, "We don't really know why. Someone else made the rules and told us to follow them. We want to eat and feed our families, so we follow the rules. Who are you?"
So this shackled woman with a wrinkled face and thick, unkempt hair sighs and says, "I'm God."